Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Nice, beautiful sunny day here in Wagga. I feel like spring is getting closer.
Yeah, I saw some daffodils yesterday.
Oh, mine are alive and shooting up in the front garden too. A bit early, a bit keen, a bit early.
Yeah.
Have you got wattle out yet? Because we've got a stack of it out here in Port.
Yeah, I just noticed a bit yesterday, actually.
Cue the Telfast.
I know.
Oh,
Go
go right
straight
from
from the
flu
flu
into,
season. Yep.
yeah.
To allergies.
Oh, some tomatoes.
Yeah, there's that whole thing about when is the last of the frosts? When's it going to happen? And you think, no. Someone said to me for Bathurst, you can't do it until race weekend. So getting into October and things. And if you're trying to
Yep.
plant tomatoes before that at all, you're insane. But anyhow, I digress. It is 3 past the hour, so I think we might make a start, and then I'll just admit more people as they arrive, etc. So I might just do um, a very brief welcome, and there's Kath McCarthy. We'll let her in, and I'll just say thank you for coming out this morning to join us for another Teaching Academy PD session. And today's workshop is being run by members of the Division of Library Services, and we're joined by Beck Fabry and Lorraine Rose. And we also have Kelly Shaw from the Division of Learning and Teaching as well. And they're going to be running us through a workshop around literature review, assessments, and better ways to approach them, etc. So strap yourselves in. Any kind of commentary, etc., questions, please put things into the chat or raise your hand, etc. And we can stop periodically to engage with those. So take it away, Beck.
Thanks, Lachlan. So we might just start with an acknowledgement of country. Did you want to start with that, Kel?
Sure. I'm first cab off the rank this morning. So, acknowledgement of country. We respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we live and work together. Charles Sturt University and its staff pay respect to elders within First Nations communities and acknowledge the continuity of cultures, languages, leadership, and knowledge systems that sustain the work we do today. Thanks, Beck. Okay, so today, as you know from signing on, we're going to be looking at literature reviews. And more specifically, these are the aspects of literature reviews that we're going to review. Now, good practice, I suppose, with any assessment is to consider the why. So what's the purpose behind what we're trying to do? We want to identify and address some common challenges students face with lit review style assessments. And this has emerged from conversations that I have had with Beck and Lorraine and just some of the pain points that they have seen students experience. And then obviously with my lens as an educational designer. We're going to consider the ways in which we can support students. So we want them to still do this. It's a very valuable way of assessing students. But what are some things that we can do to help them as they commit to the big scary literature review in its many forms? And part of that will be looking at selecting tools and approaches that suit the task. So that's where kind of that really good, robust assessment design starts to come into the picture. And really, we want to try to help scaffold and meet the students where they're at. So not necessarily hand feed, but just make it so that we've got really good paved inroads for them to attack a task such as this. And then in this kind of the second half of the presentation, the Beck and Lorraine will be looking at ways, some of those tools, and then offer ways that we can design review style tasks that are achievable and well supported, and hopefully still get those good outcomes that we're trying to get for our students. Okay, thanks, Beck. Next slide, please. Okay, so broadly, we're looking at kind of two areas. So the skill development, lit reviews are a great opportunity for students to build a whole range of academic skills and other kind of soft skills or broadly based research skills, which we'll look at in a little bit more detail. And then what we're really looking to get is that alignment with the library and the support that the library is able to offer and ways it can support students in that. Okay, so why review style assessments matter? So this kind of goes back to considering some of that why. So I kind of look at it as almost like a three-tiered approach, or big down to small. So when we look at like the top level approach of what a literature review task is designed to do, we're really talking about some of those really panoramic kind of, as I call them, skills. So we're looking at the development of critical thinking skills. When you get a second, have a look at the definition to critical thinking. That's on the bottom half of this slide, because I think it's a really good one. But also those panoramic skills include that understanding of like professional knowledge issues, finding current research, because that's really important if we're training students to be practitioners. And CSU, our brand, very much aligns with that whole idea that we've got very practically minded students going into very practically minded professions. When you look at some of our biggest courses, such as nursing, teaching, social work, ag. So they really need to be kind of on the front foot and understanding those more complex issues that might be going on in their profession. When we look at, and that also might dovetail into like a specific area in a career, or a more nuanced area of their career that they may pursue as a result of the exposure to some of the research opportunities that they may get. Some of the big picture skills development, so that more holistic understanding of the research process, which we're going to look at a little bit more later. Framing research questions, skills like thematic analysis, identifying gaps. That's always a big one in a lit review, or when you're undertaking research, where are the gaps in the literature? And then obviously piquing interest, as I've mentioned, in their career area or future area of specialization, maybe honors work, maybe PhD, or a research project, a capstone. And then obviously alignment with broader course learning outcomes and our CSU graduate learning outcomes. And then down on the ground, that really close up, kind of more granular level skills that students develop in this process is like the writing, referencing, and summarizing, which again, like they're very stock standard skills, but they're really important that students feel confident doing, and will go a long way, because it is almost like a boilerplate. If you're good at those things, you're kind of taking them from one subject to the next and 1 year to the next as you progress through your learning experience and your learning journey. I think the other thing that's really important about literature reviews is they do provide an opportunity for what is sometimes referred to as authentic assessment. Now, that might sound a little bit like edu-speak or edu-babble, but really what we're looking at for authentic assessment is, does it give them that opportunity to integrate kind of multiple sets of skills, which we can see from the panoramic down to the more close-up. It definitely does. It gives them some choice. It gives them some opportunity to reflect. It gives them opportunity to apply critical thinking. But at the same time, a literature review is very process focused. So you're following kind of a set of steps, and it is, it's probably not linear steps. It's probably like the squiggle, but at the end of the day, the final product is really the result of having followed that process. The other thing that I just want to mention here, as we're talking more broadly about assessments, is we are currently looking at a landscape where our assessments are going to change or be reevaluated. And that is definitely something that we will be downstream of, and part of the strategic planning that's going on. And if you're not aware of kind of the bigger things that are going on in that space right now, this is the assessment redesign is looking at requirements that have come out of TEXA in response to the use of AI, and then also tied more broadly to the work that we're doing with the Models of Engagement and Assessment project. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. However, that doesn't mean, excuse me, that literature reviews or this style of assessment is going to just disappear. It's just something to be mindful of as we move into kind of the next phase with looking at our assessments and putting that lens over things. Okay, thanks, Beck. Next slide. Excuse me while I just have a sip of my drink. Okay, so I've touched on, excuse me, some of these things already. So why use review style assessments? And some planning points to consider. And this first kind of bullet point might seem like a very obvious one, but I think as educators, and I come from a teaching background, I've been a sessional lecturer on and off for about 10 years at CSU. But we need to always ask ourselves, what is it that we're really looking that for the students to be able to demonstrate? Like, what are those core skills? And as I kind of already talked about in the previous slide, with something like a literature, you're really talking about a large scope of skills. So it's a very rich assessment activity. Some other points to consider, and in my role as an educational designer, when we're looking across subjects from multiple schools and multiple subjects, we really sometimes see that the task description and the marking criteria might not always be perfectly aligned. So that's, again, something to reconsider as you go through. Just good practice when you revisit your subject outlines. What value does the assessment have for the student? So sometimes we kind of get into our own little silo, our own little thought process about, oh, I really want them to be able to do X, Y, or Z. But have we communicated that to them? So again, might seem an obvious thing, but as I said, it's very easy to kind of get lost in the forest through the trees. And it is definitely worth saying to students, hey, this is of value to you because I was telling Beck in the preparation we were doing for this workshop that my daughter is a second-year university student, and she had to do kind of her first foray into literature and using academic literature and compiling a lit review. And at first she was like, what's the point of this? This is so hard. I'll never get through this. And then at the end, she really could see the value. She said, wow, I just felt like it just kind of opened a new set of optics into my profession. So that's really good. And that's really what we're aiming for in designing something like this for students. Again, another kind of area where we can see some lack of clarity is the type of lit review that we're really expecting students to produce. Is that clear in the task description? And sometimes there is some misnomers or sometimes interchange of terminology, like we might say scoping, but then later on we're saying a narrative or a critical lit review, and they all mean slightly different things. So it's, again, just making sure that it's clear and that it's there's that continuity in terms of the type, and is that aligning with what's in the marking criteria or the rubric, and is it aligning with the subject learning outcomes? Is the task thoroughly unpacked and explained? And I have seen definitely in some subject outlines where it'll just say for the assessment task, compile a lit review. Okay. And that's probably not enough because it's definitely not enough because we're assuming a lot of pre-knowledge that the students might not necessarily have in terms of attacking that as a task. So this is where it's really helpful to make sure that there's a good description, that the task is scaffolded and broken down into steps or kind of bullet points, or offers some ways for them to start to tackle this. And also, if their suggested areas of focus are appropriate, are there ways to direct their research into a particular area that you might want them to look at? Maybe not. Maybe that's part of the discovery that they're going to go on this journey of doing a lit review, but there can be opportunities to do that. And one way is through the use of AI. And AI there's a whole body of tools and body of work that's going on in that space. And I hope that Beck and Lorraine may speak to that a little bit later on in the presentation today. But even for like research question formation, that's a very kind of easy way that we can use AI that's still ethical and is still hopefully going to give the students some scaffolding or some shape as they begin a task such as this. So some pitfalls to avoid. So the first one, again, perhaps might seem obvious, but still really important, is that we can't assume that students know what a literature review involves or that there are different types that they may be expected to produce. Vague or generalized instructions. So write a literature review. I've talked about that one already. Omitting expectations, and the library will talk to this a little bit more, but particularly when there's a mention of specific types of sources or tools, such as Prisma, that's in, say, the marking criteria, but hasn't been mentioned in the task description. Again, not providing the steps or an overview or some scaffolding. no additional resources provided. So even links to the library from the subject outline or from where the task description might appear with more detail in Brightspace. That's really important just to kind of really help students make those nice, easy jumps and transitions to from where the task is to what they're going to be expected to do and how they're expected to start to make inroads into that. Overcomplicating the task with reference tools that students may not be aware of or might not even need to use at this stage. Vague, confusing, or inconsistent terminology, and I've talked a little bit about that already, so maybe omitting things like a word count or kind of the expectation around possibly the number of sources that you're expecting them to compile or look at. A term like search rationale, that might be something that they've never heard before, and a scoping review, but is it really a scoping review that you're asking them, or is that just kind of like something that's been absorbed as a generic approach to a literature review, which could be confusing for students and maybe not what you're expecting them to do. And lastly, expecting students to rely on the marking rubric. Now, again, this is something in my role as an ed designer that I have seen where the task description is fairly broad and vague. And it's not really until the students get down into the rubric that they really start to get a little bit of insight into what the task is actually asking them to do. And that's just not ideal because it can be confusing and there's a lot of cognitive load that potentially students are using to kind of just unpack and understand the assessment that we really want them to reserve for actually doing the task rather than just trying to understand what they are supposed to be doing. Okay. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything that they'd like to add or throw in at this stage before we move on to the next slide? I know there's a lot of text and a lot of information on this slide, so. All good? Okay, next slide.
Yeah, we're good to move on, Kel. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one, but basically different types of literature reviews, even something like a more simplified version and compiling an annotated bibliography, maybe that's enough for your subject, again, depending on what level that it is. And we've kind of tiered them from easier or kind of low complexity to the more high complex. So that might be something that you can kind of come back and revisit. And there's also a couple of links in here to our resources. So the library guides and also our Division of Learning and Teaching page on using lit reviews. Okay, thanks. Okay, so again, I've touched on this already, but just in terms of providing students with support to attempt a task like this, and there's kind of like an old saying among educational designers, haha, that students can get through university with poor teaching experiences, but they can't get through university with poorly written assessment tasks or poorly compiled assessments. So it's really important that we remember that even though assessment, we go, oh, the marking, and it's just so onerous, and it's not the part of the job that really lights the fire in us. But from a student point of view, it's really important that we get it right. So anticipating some of those challenges. So considering the academic history, and I know we think particularly a lot of the lit reviews assessments might be in subjects that are more aligned to postgraduate work, but we can't assume that students have ever had any exposure to what a lit review is. There are a handful of courses that we run where we might get students coming into postgraduate courses for a variety of reasons have never completed an undergraduate degree. They may have come through a TAFE pathway, they may have had years of life and work experience, and then they're eligible to go into a master's. So that's worth being mindful of because they just might not have that insight into like the research process and the academic research process that goes along with that. And then considering more broadly, where is the task in the subject? Where is it situated within the broader course? And have they, as I said, had those experiences of using and applying baseline library skills, Boolean terms, awareness that there's different databases that they can use that are profession aligned to their professions. Maybe they've only used Google Scholar, and just kind of trying to think, and this might be a matter of asking them, what do they think their key challenges are going to be for doing a task such as this? And as I said, we can't assume that because it's a postgrad subject that the students already have these skills. Also, another part of postgraduate students, as we know, we've got people who are, generally speaking, mature age, they're working professionals, they're probably wearing multiple hats, they may have carers duties, so they just need really a way in. We need to try to make it as easy for them to take on a complex task. And the library, obviously, and I'm going to hand over to the library in a second, but that's one form of support. But I think from writing task descriptions, it's not helpful for the students to have it be really vague and then kind of assume that, well, they'll just work it out from what's available in the library resources. We really need to make sure that there's a clear way for them to work through a task of this nature. Okay, I think that's, yeah, Lachlan.
So just more on that point, I guess, are you also sort of saying that the context in that space in explaining why they need to have the lit review in the first instance is in some ways just as important as the instruction around, like you talked about vague instruction, I guess, which might be getting into specifics around, the type of review that needs to be done, etc. I guess I'm thinking as well about that element of relevance or relatedness, particularly for early students, needing to understand why the task is important. Would you sort of include that in that explanation? And where does that go is my other question.
Yeah, I would. And most assessment tasks at the bottom, and a lot of this is part and parcel of the formatting of the subject outline, where it will have the learning outcomes that the student is meeting, but they can be quite generic. So sometimes it is worth kind of having that little, just might be a sentence or two. We don't have to overcomplicate it, but this is why this is important. So they're kind of seeing that connection between, as I said, the subject learning outcomes, which can feel possibly a bit generic, and what they're actually going to be doing, and how there's a practical aspect to what they might be discovering or learning in the process of completing a lit review. I mean, best case scenario, you get a student who says, wow, this is so amazing. I never knew X about my potential profession. I want to go and do a year of honors, whatever it might be. So does that clarify?
Yeah, thank you. That's good. I just think sometimes that students are generally looking for that value proposition, even subconsciously, about why they need to invest energy and time into something. And you mentioned AI before. It's almost like that value proposition has to move into the overt, explicit space, so that they don't take necessarily the easiest possible option just to churn out the required text type, So if it's like the reason that this is going to benefit me, not just in this subject or not just for this particular assessment task, etc., is almost justification at some level for me to engage with it genuinely and put in the time and effort. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think that's a very compelling point. And also, when I was teaching a lit subject, like a intro to academic writing subject last year, one of the things that I did as an exercise with the students was I got a list from AI of sources, and then had them, and a lot of them were hallucinations, and I had them go then into the library search to see if they could find them. So there's lots of different things that we need to kind of be bringing students' attention to as they begin any sort of research task or research-based task. So I think that is a really good point about what's the value proposition, or what's the value add for them. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll do my next slide. Okay, so I'm not going to read through every single one of these, but in terms of how we can support students, again, it's trying to consider what obstacles or issues can be addressed. And as I've already kind of mentioned already, part of that starts with the assessment design and the clarity around the task description, and making sure that there's nice alignment between the task description, what's in the marking criteria. is it supporting the subject learning outcomes? And then, as Lachlan's pointed out, really kind of highlighting what the value add or the value proposition is for students. So some of these, you're not obviously going to be able to use every one, but it's just some way of framing some suggestions around ways that might be beneficial to students, particularly if this is completely new to them and they haven't studied in a while, or they haven't really had an opportunity to do a lot of research or kind of get into some of the aspects of that in terms of their tertiary study. So I'll just give you a second to read through that one. And anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to ask about? All right. Next slide, please, Beck. Okay, so this is my last slide. So setting up students for success. So we've talked about expectations, aligning the task, all of the things that we can do with that and ways that we can support students. Now we're going to look more at choosing the appropriate tools, and then with the help of library, how that coordinated support can help students as they do this. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kel. Some really great points in there. So we're going to look at some practical strategies now and how these can sort of work in practice. And these ideas have come from the library's experience in the review space. So the library has a lot of experience in this space, both supporting students undertaking these type of tasks, to also actively participating in research teams conducting systematic and scoping reviews. So that's where these examples or ideas or strategies have come from. And it's all about, as Kel has mentioned, setting those clear task expectations, recommending appropriate tools and methods, and that coordinated support that we can provide. So that's from the library, educational designers, and you, of course, as teaching staff as well. So first up, how we frame these tasks can actually make a really big difference. So as Kel sort of talked about a little bit earlier, terms like systematic review or scoping review have really specific meanings in the research space. So for example, a systematic review actually typically involves a research team and can take anywhere from 8 months to 2 years to complete. And when terms like these are used in coursework tasks without any clarification, it can lead to students being confused and overwhelmed because they might be assuming that they're expected to deliver that same level of depth and complexity. So instead, here we can just look at small changes in language that can help students approach their work with clarity and confidence. So just as an example, instead of using the phrase conduct a systematic review, here we can think about using, a different phrase like conduct a literature review, using a systematic approach to evaluate, search, evaluate, and synthesize key sources. And this kind of simple reframing sets realistic expectations, reduces that confusion for students, and also makes it easier for both the library and academic teaching staff to provide targeted support for students. And alternatively, there might also be situations where students may benefit more from engaging with select elements of the review process, like developing a robust search strategy or practicing critical appraisal without having to undertake a full review. Next up, we'll have a look at choosing the right tools. So selecting tools that suit the scale and intent of the task is often key as well. So when students are asked to use tools that are designed for formal team-based systematic reviews, like Covidence or Prisma, they may find themselves navigating complexity that's really unnecessary for the level of study or for the learning outcomes of the task. So over the next couple of slides, we're just going to look at some practical alternatives to these tools that can still teach those essential skills, but without overwhelming students. First up, Covidence. So Covidence is a tool designed to streamline screening, data extraction, and quality assessment in systematic reviews. But it's not a search tool. It does require setup and training, and it's not accessible to all students. So although the library has a subscription to Covidence, it's not actually accessible to undergraduate or postgraduate coursework students. and it's often not necessary for small-scale tasks. Yeah, like you just mentioned Excel in the chat there. Yeah, so one of the alternatives we can look at is just using an Excel spreadsheet, to be honest, or a Google Sheet, or a simple search strategy worksheet. It doesn't need to be really complex. Just something that students can use to plan out their search strategies, track which databases they've searched, manage and reflect on their search results, and record inclusion and exclusion decisions. So yeah, that really bad blurry image on the screen there is just of an Excel spreadsheet, just with sections already entered so that students can add details of their searching, articles they've found, and the reasoning for inclusion and exclusion as well. So this is still a structured process, but it offers a more accessible approach that enables students to learn those repeatable and transparent review methods without that need for specialist software. Next up, we'll have a look at Prisma. So Prisma diagrams are commonly used in systematic reviews to map out the screening process, but they're often too detailed for undergraduate and even some postgraduate tasks, to be honest. So instead, here we can think about using simplified versions of the Prisma flowchart. And this still promotes transparency and reflection because it allows students to identify how many results they retrieved, how many were screened, and how many were included as well. So we'd refer to this as a Prisma-informed approach. So still giving students that experience of documenting a review process, but without suggesting that they're conducting a full systematic review. And next up, we'll have a look at the number of databases to search. Yeah, Lachlan, you had a question?
Sorry, I'm going to be that student today. This is probably more even directed to Kelly. You just mentioned, I guess, documenting process and looking at the process along the way as being important for this. And certainly when you consider some of the conversations that we're having around both the direction towards programmatic assessment and a breakdown and move away from ultimately looking at the end artifact as the only or product from an assessment as being the thing that's being graded, really, to more visibility, transparency around the process. What you've just sort of demonstrated there would seem to fit right into that. What do you think, Kel?
Yeah, I totally agree. And whenever I was teaching academic writing skills based subjects, I would always say to the students, like, just do not leave your referencing until the end. I couldn't encourage them enough to do it as they went along. So whether I said, even if it's a matter of just starting with copying and pasting links into a Word document, not ideal, but it's just an inroad. And the other thing that I forgot to mention earlier was that sometimes lit reviews are actually part of a larger kind of assessment piece. So they may be something that students might do, say, as earlier in a subject, and then they're kind of using something that they've discovered to build on an assessment later, or a piece of research that they might do later. So it is worth kind of, again, drawing that value, but also making sure that they understand that if they invest in putting those pillars in place to get the process right, that it makes their work a hell of a lot easier down the track, rather than trying to scramble after the fact to find their information, find their data, collate it all, and then ultimately put it into a reference list. Beck or Lorraine, did you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah.
Probably seen some horror stories like I have.
It's just using, a simple document like that Excel spreadsheet, and encouraging those students to be recording. That automatically brings in that reflection and critical thinking that the students need to be doing, and also helps. I think if you're concerned at all about students using AI in an assessment task, having them document those processes and being sort of forced to reflect on them and understand the process itself, I think really helps to, avoid or mediate those issues to a certain extent. It's just encouraging good practice, really, isn't it?
Yeah, totally agree.
Mm.
Thanks.
And I'd also add that I always say to the students it helps save them time, because if they can note down where they've searched, they don't then duplicate the effort the next day when they come back and keep searching. So it's just a time saver for them.
Yeah, good points. Any more questions about that, about documenting the process? We do have, lots of library resources available that Lorraine will point to at the end of the session today, with templates that can be used for documenting these processes, and just instructions on how to do that are helpful for students as well. Okay, so we'll have a look at how many databases to search for a literature review task now. So that's a big question. How many databases should you be asking your students to search when they're taking on these types of tasks? And interestingly, we've actually found that recommending like just 1 or 2 databases can be really powerful, because this allows students to focus on those core search skills rather than having to spend time translating a complex search strategy across multiple platforms or managing overwhelming numbers of results. And of course, the library, again, is really happy to help in this space. So we can provide recommendations on the databases that are appropriate for particular tasks or for cohorts. We can help with what to use and what to avoid as well. So really happy to chat anytime about those decisions. And in addition to suggesting appropriate databases to search, it's also helpful if expectations around search strategy requirements are clarified too. So for example, should students in their searching be using keywords, subject headings, or both? So it's this kind of guidance that can really streamline that student experience working through these tasks, and also helps to match task design to a student's level, and also supports that consistent, sustainable library support across subjects too. So the clearer these guidelines and expectations are for students, the better the library can support students as well. Are there any questions about that? Databases to use or tools to use? All good. So with all of these ideas in mind, we've put together a few example assessment task ideas that could be used, adapted or built upon. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'll hand over to Lorraine, who's going to take over and is going to talk us through those examples. Thanks, Lorraine.
Thanks, Beck. Just share my screen. Great. So as Beck said, we have pulled together a few example assessment tasks that they're just ideas that maybe you'd like to adapt or build on. The ideas include a task focused on developing a search strategy, another task that uses a modified literature review task using a PRISMA-informed approach, and then also a critical appraisal task. But I'll go through those in a little bit more detail. So this slide represents an example of a simplified literature review assessment. The objective of the task is to help students learn how to develop and document a search strategy. Instead of asking students to conduct a full review, this task focuses on the foundational skills of formulating a research question and using a framework such as PICO, but there's lots of frameworks around. Also identifying just a couple of relevant databases, and then constructing a comprehensive search strategy using keywords and Boolean operators. A key part of this assessment is documenting the search process, which teaches the students the importance of transparency and reproducibility. This approach breaks down a complex literature review into more manageable skill-based components, showing how to find evidence. The next example we've got is developing using a PRISMA-informed approach. So while students aren't expected to complete a full PRISMA flowchart in this example, this task introduces them to the fundamental principles of systematically tracking their search process. By using a simplified template, students can learn to document each step from the total number of records identified to the final sources included in their assessment. This method teaches the students the importance of a structured and transparent process, ensuring they can clearly show where they've searched and how many results they've found and why they have included or excluded certain articles. This example also is a way to introduce students to the rigour of evidence-based searching without the complexity of a systematic-like review. And then a final example is an assessment focused on critical appraisal and risk of bias. And this task moves beyond simply finding sources and challenges students to evaluate the quality of the evidence they find. The objectives here are to teach students how to use some established tools to critically appraise scientific literature, assess the methodology of the literature, the quality of it, and the risk of bias in primary research studies, and then understand how study quality impacts the overall evidence synthesis. This type of assessment helps students develop a more sophisticated understanding of research, moving them from just summarising information to critically analysing it. And I'll just check if there's any questions about those 3 examples. Great. So to help with these assessment tasks, we at the library offer a range of ready-to-use resources that can be added directly to your subject sites to guide students through the review process. These are designed to build confidence and support key learning outcomes. We have a mixture of self-help guides and demonstration videos available, and we've got some links here in this slide, some various guides, but I'll just jump into our library website and show you where they are. So from our library homepage, I'm going into our library guides, and they're scattered through the guides, but one easy way to find them is in research support, and we've got our literature review guide, but I'll just jump into the science honours guide first. So with this science honours guide, we've got tabs here on the left guiding students how to search for the literature, where to search, how to search. On our home page, though, we have a couple of search planners and guides that they can download. So this is a good example, this search planner, of tracking those searches, keeping an idea of where you've searched, what terms you've used, just to avoid that duplication and show transparency with the search. And then also on this page, we have some videos here as well. So some different parts, part 1, 2, and 3 of conducting a literature review. Then if I just jump back to the library guides page, and we also have the literature review guide as well. And so these are the kind of guides that can be linked to in subject sites. Certainly videos that we have in these, they can be embedded into your subject sites as well. And just because it was mentioned earlier, I'll just point out the generative AI guide, and we are developing resources here to help the students use Gen AI in their study and their research. So if I go into the For Research section, we've got some videos here on using AI tools and where you can use them, so that brainstorming ideas, understanding concepts. So some different ideas there on using those AI tools. So that's something that's always in development that we're constantly updating and working on. And I'll just bring us to the last slide, and then we'll have time for any questions. But I guess what we really want to say is we'd love to collaborate with you. And if you're designing or refining a review style assessment or supporting students currently working on one, the library is here to help. We have got a whole lot of resources. We're also ready to have discussions, talk about which databases to use, a whole lot of things that we have talked about today, that what should they be using, a plan or Excel spreadsheet. So very happy to have a chat about all of this anytime. And that brings us to the end, but any questions now, comments? Oh, yes, Lachlan.
Yeah, Lachlan.
Sorry, annoying student again. A couple of things. One of them was you talked about providing the search planner to students to, I guess, facilitate the process for them, and as you said, avoid duplication and streamline the process. Would you see that as a part of the submission itself, something that the students could then almost discuss the process, if we're talking about that transparency and looking at even the simplified Prisma workflow, et cetera, like they would seem to be elements of that conversation into process. Do you see that being a possibility, Lorraine?
Yes, definitely. And I know there are some assessments that we help students with where they are given a planner, and that's part of their assessment to provide that all filled out. So yes, it's a good way to teach them, but also show evidence of how they've done it. And I should show that, expand that to be now planners can have acknowledgement in them as well. So if, say, we're acknowledging AI tool use, a planner could have some kind of table like this where we've documented as we're going what tool we've used, how we've used it, the prompt we've used, and maybe where that content has been used in the literature review as well. So this, as well as documenting all those searches, databases, documenting other types of tools that might be used in the process.
Look, that's excellent, particularly that acknowledgement piece as well, because essentially there's possibility with that with just about every type of assessment where we're looking for an artifact of sorts to be submitted, and we want to see that, whether they're getting into conversations about talking about the process, but seeing that, like, that's essentially I guess an information literacy skill that needs almost to be demonstrated with every text submission of any text type almost now. Like it's explicit identification of what's been used along the way. I'd almost be saying that something like that needs to make its way into subject outlines at some level as a requirement for the presentation element of the outline. I'm just riffing here, Kel, but does that sound right?
I agree. I was telling Beck again when we were having conversations around this workshop that I had a conversation with academic earlier in the year because they were creating some new assessments for a subject, and I said, now's your opportunity to say this is how you can use AI to do this. And long story short, I basically got told no, they didn't want to do that. And it was interesting because I thought, well, if I'm a student, I'm going to do some of those things. I'm going to use it anyway. And then that becomes kind of like the ethical issue for students, doesn't it? It's like, well, I really just use it like I would use Wikipedia. I just use it to brainstorm. I just used it to give me an initial understanding of the War of 1812 or whatever it is that I'm looking to research, right? So I think we still have a long way to go in that. And obviously with the text requirements that we're going to be downstream of. But I think I would love to see something like that in a subject outline is kind of a part and parcel acknowledgement of these tools exist. We know that they are there to support and enhance learning, not to replace your learning. So please document how you use them, or give them an opportunity to document how they have used them.
It really works on multiple levels, because it's not just something that I would consider almost in the same way that I think about a reference list, for example, because what I'm looking at here is effectively it gives the teacher information about the way students are approaching the use of these tools, not just in the context of this task, but the way they approach prompting in general, the level of sophistication that they have when using those tools, whether that's potentially the right way to approach using them, or if that needs to be engaged with in some way. It's also by default making them think about doing those things. If this is an expectation as a part of the task, you're also getting them to engage in that skilling itself without saying the aim of this task is to get you to know how to use AI tools to do to facilitate a lit review. This is actually more making it, this is an expectation across any assessment type, really, that you start building this into your process, your research, your preparation, your approach to the task. So it gives information to the academic. It forces the student to approach that process in quite a I guess almost quite a structured way moving forward as well. I think there's some real possibilities for something so simple in some ways, like a table that just breaks down how you're using the thing. But if you just start making it almost a default element of preparation for, particularly for text types, if for assessment, I think there could be some real flow-on benefits into the broader kind of skilling. Anyway, I'll stop going off on that tangent there.
Yeah, and it really supports the transparency around AI use. And I think it alleviates a lot of that fear for students, because I think, and library may be able to speak to this as well, but I think there's a lot of potential anxiety for some students, particularly the ones who want to do the right thing, where they're like, oh, I used it for this, but I don't know if that's okay. There's this like massive gray area that they're swimming in all the time. And I think integrating something like this, or an acknowledgement or a table, or show them how they can do it, and how, as you said, it's like the math, show you working out, right? Don't just like plop down the answer. Show me the trail of breadcrumbs that you followed to get to that end point. And I think that's really important. And I think that's kind of going to be the new piece of the puzzle that we need to consider every time we start thinking about assessment. Because AI is just changing so quickly.
Sorry, I've just been scribbling some notes there, but I think we've probably reached that point in the session. Kath, you're still with us. Have you got any questions, comments, feedback, anything for the presenters today?
No, just thank you, and listening intently. Trying to work all this out. I think
absolutely.
I think the AI use acknowledgement example, I think that's gold.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine, for sharing that as well. I've just made notes in the background for the AIPD people as well to stick their noses into it, although we are going live with that on Monday morning. So, not that I want to ruin their Fridays or anything, but hey, why don't you go and have a look at this sort of thing as well? All right, well, look, I think at that point, I'd like to say a big thank you on behalf of those of us in here for the live session, and also anyone watching the recording afterwards once it goes onto the Teaching Academy channel. Thank you for coming out for another Teaching Academy PD session. Thank you to Lorraine, to Beck and to Kelly for sharing their wisdom today and their experiences in this space. Plenty more conversations to come, and we look forward to seeing you all again.
Thanks
Have a
for the
great
opportunity.
rest of the week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.